Okay, hey, this is Brent Leary, and with me today is Taylor Schreiner. I want to make sure I get it right. He is the Director of Adobe Digital Insights at Adobe. Taylor, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate it.
So you guys just put out this really interesting study around kind of the adoption levels of voice assistants and smart speaker ownerships and all the things I love to talk about. So we're going to get into that in a second, but before we do, maybe you can give us a little of your personal background.
Oh, gosh. So I've been in this kind of an industry for a long time. We'll skip past mom and dad and the whole background there. We'll go straight to, I kind of got into the internet space through Yahoo back in the day. And I had been running advertising research organizations at Yahoo and Twitter and LinkedIn. And then at TubeMogul, and when Adobe acquired TubeMogul, shortly thereafter, I took over this Adobe Digital Insights team, which I can't claim credit for. They've been an amazing team, but I've been running them for a little over a year now. And we have an amazing set of data that we are really proud and excited to bring out to the world and the industry. So I'm glad to have this kind of forum to talk about it.
So the report is called The State of Voice Assistants, just freshly released. So maybe you could tell us kind of a general explanation of what it's about, and also why Adobe decided to do it now.
Yeah, the why and the what are really, really tightly bound there. So just to step way back, we every holiday season have done an assessment of U.S. online retail. Right, we look at what products are hot, what people are buying, all sorts of stuff, and you'll see that again coming from us in November. But as we looked at those retail trends through this year, we kept seeing voice. Smart speakers are being purchased. Even things that aren't smart speakers have, in-home, smart home technologies integrated with the smart speakers. So we said, look, this is really interesting. We want to dive into it. We put some surveys out there. This one in particular we got excited about because when we talk to companies we work with, there's a lot of assumptions about voice, but not a lot of really clear data about what people are doing with it. And so moving from, are people buying it, what are they buying, to how are they using it became a really clear effort for us, clear thing for us to do. So that was the motivation. And then really, we wanted to ask, look, we all have anecdotal experience with voice devices, either personally or, I don't personally have a smart speaker in my home because my wife won't allow it, but our neighbors have them. I see the kids interact with them. They're there. It's in the car. It's on my phone. It's on the watch. It's everywhere. So, but everybody has their own opinion about, how is this all evolving? And we want to really get a more comprehensive sense of how voice is working in the world. And so what we did, we asked, I won't dive too deep yet into the answers, but we asked the questions, what are you doing? What do you have, right? What do you do with it? And not just sort of like, do you check the weather or whatnot, but what are your real interactions with that? And then one of the things that got really exciting for us too is we wanted to ask, well, how's it changing your relationship to the spaces and the people that you're with? Really begin to get to the sociological level of how is voice changing how people interact.
And this study was done with roughly about 1,000 adults in the U.S., right?
Yeah, over 1,000 adults in the U.S. at the end of August.
Great. So what were some of the key takeaways or findings that you came out of this with?
Sure. So, there's actually so much for what we saw, for one survey. A lot came out of that. Some of it was confirming things you would expect, right? So people check the weather, people play music on their devices, right? We sort of divvied the world, and there's a set of behaviors that you expect people to do, and they do. And then there's a deepening set of other behaviors that are more interesting, like sports scores, kitchen recipes, all sorts of the things that are anecdotally you see, but specifically, an individual might not do. So a lot of people, almost everybody does the first category. Everybody does some of the second category. And then we see everybody seems to do one or two of what I would call the third category, which are really deep interactions that for marketers and for consumers are really new and interesting. Like, I'm actually going to check my credit balance. I'm going to price these tickets. I'm going to ask, what would it, you're maybe in the middle of a debate as to whether you should get a bigger television. You can actually ask the device, like, how much would it really cost you to get a 60-inch television or 60-inch smart television, you can actually have these conversations really quickly, even more quickly than you might from a mobile device. So that was one big takeaway, that there are these three categories of behaviors, and we're seeing really increasing depth in that third category. The second thing we saw was, for us, we have a lot of the work we do is around retail. What are people buying? There was a big question in the industry about, do people really make purchases on voice devices? And the answer is maybe more than you would think. So about a quarter, depending on what you're asking, about a sixth to a quarter of people have done some kind of purchasing, be it their takeout, order pizza, or maybe their 7-year-old learned how to order pizza, but somehow they ordered pizza. They've made individual purchases. Some of them make recurring purchases on those devices. And so, I think that's the layer that, at that level, it's really kind of interesting for a retailer to look at. But if you look at the behaviors leading up to a purchase, people are doing more and more of that kind of thing. What's the price? How many colors does this come in? What's a flight how long is a flight from A to B? A lot of the research elements go there, even if, at the end of the day, people aren't still really necessarily comfortable with actually finishing the purchase on that device. Yeah. So, the takeaway for consumers is that's transforming, and brands are going to be there to help you with that. The takeaway for brands would be, you got to be where your consumers are, where they're doing the research, even if they're not making the purchase. We learned that with so many other channels, right? And then, there's more. But I would say the third thing that really struck me, the thing that was surprising to me, was the number of people who are going to buy another one, another Echo Dot, another Google Home, another, any one of these things. Because, when we ask the questions, are you going to buy one as a gift? If you already own one, yes. That if you own one, if you own a smart speaker. So I'm talking about smart speakers here. There's more to talk about with other elements of voice, but smart speakers for the moment. If you own a smart speaker, of course you're more likely to give one as a gift. If you've enjoyed it, right? But what was really striking is almost half, 45% or so of people who own a smart speaker are looking to buy another one, which tells me a couple things. It tells me, they're liking it, they're willing to spend the money on it, but also they've got some uses for those things. And maybe it sits in the living room and they play music, and they're tired of having to go from the kitchen to the living room and ask it a question. And now they kind of want to expand their voice network in the home. And I got to admit, I didn't actually anticipate that, but it's very clear in the data that people are looking to have a broader access to their smart speakers in their house.
Yeah, one of the things that I found out, like you said, there's a lot of data points in here. And when you talk about the folks that have smart speakers going to buy more for themselves, but also more for other people, and it's pretty interesting to see how smart speakers are driving this kind of, like you say, the voice excitement versus the mobile phone, which there are more mobile phones out there. People are using them all the time, every day, for a number of things. But yet and still, it's the smart speaker that seems to be driving the real interest in using voice first to do things, use voice assistants. Do you have any thoughts about why that is, since we've been using phones for so much longer, but it's the smart speaker that's actually driving the interest?
Yeah, it's really interesting that if you own a smart speaker, you're about 3 times as likely to use voice on your phone. You're more likely to use it in your car, on your watch. All of these modes open up once you've got that speaker. So a couple things must be going on. We don't really get to, it's hard to get to that directly, but one thing that's clear is when you can just yell at objects in your living room and get a response, you open up to some new ideas about how you might use voice, right? So one hypothesis, and I think it's borne out in the data, is you just get to see the utility of voice much more clearly when you have a smart speaker. The other hypothesis, which is very much borne out in the data, is when you have a smart speaker, you are more comfortable socially talking to things. And I've been struck by, just over the past few years, how rapidly, as a culture, we've become accustomed to talking to objects. Yeah. And what's clear is that if you have a smart speaker, you're used to having that you're used to whatever that device is, being in your living room and having that conversation and being in the middle of a chat with your friends and debating whether Kevin Bacon was in a particular movie and just yelling at the speaker, hey, can you answer this question for me? And not thinking about that might have been strange 5 years ago, right? So both of those things, then once you're willing to do that, well, of course you're willing to yell at your car or talk to your phone, whatever. The interesting anecdote I have about that is that, I got to the point with my navigation that, I was going someplace and the navigation was telling me to go a different way and I knew better. And so I yelled, I said, hey, shut up. And then my kid in the back is like 5 years old and he's like, hey, shut up. And I thought, we really got to think about the norms for how we address, non-humans, and politeness. But, I think we'll get to that as a society later.
So, yeah, that's really interesting. When you talked about the kind of the shopping aspect or the customer journey, there's been a lot made recently around Prime Day and kind of with the low numbers people saw for actually shopping using Alexa. I think it was like, what was it? Only like 10% of the people actually used Alexa to buy something, and then only 2% used it, and then only 10% of that 2% actually bought something else after the first time they did it. So there's a lot of people saying, well, maybe people aren't ever going to get into voice shopping. But it sounds like, looking at the data, that there are parts of the shopping journey that are already starting to travel through the voice assistant, even if the final transactions haven't taken place yet.
Yeah, I think that's true. And in my mind, I always have sort of two models of where voice is right now. One model is, look, we've seen desktops pick up at a certain, in certain curves. Advertising took off this way. At a certain point, people started doing more purchasing, more buying. Then it became really ubiquitous, and all of a sudden, everyone's doing their shopping. And mobile is following a not too distant form of that path, a little bit different in its own. But you think, look, everybody's got a smartphone now. People are doing shopping. We're seeing in our data that, for a long time, people just did maybe 10 cents or 20 cents on the dollar of shopping on their phone versus their desktop, and that's really starting to, it's not near parity, but it's really starting to close that gap pretty quickly. So one model is, look, is voice going to be like mobile? It's certainly going to be ubiquitous very quickly. We're seeing a lot of people owning them, looking to own them. They're very cheap as a consumer electronics item, and they integrate really well with all sorts of other stuff that people have. They're not very complicated to use. So it could be like mobile, right? But one thing that mobile had that was very clear was a really strong ecosystem of apps and developers and open platforms on which mobile could evolve quickly. And when I look at what's available in the voice space, it looks a little bit more to me like 1998, 99, where you can go to Yahoo, you can ask a specific set of questions. There's a flight tracker here or there. There's an app here or there. The credit card company's got a basic thing that they know how to do now, but we haven't really crossed over to figuring out the new and different utility of voice. And I think that's going to be that's our moment right now, is figuring out how voice is different and what's really going to do differently.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, since you're living in a household that doesn't have these devices because you're a wife, and there's a lot more people out there like your wife who are like, I do not want this in my house right now. Do you see that as something that over time will eventually kind of the trust will be built up enough, or the utility will be built up enough where even folks who are kind of hesitant to it now will get over the hump? Or do you see that as a continual impediment that voice will have to face?
I'm absolutely willing to answer that question on the condition that I not talk about my wife specifically and her changes in attitude. In general, I mean, I think, look, if you've got some large portion of the country of households, especially affluent households who can afford these devices, who have devices in the house, I go over to them, I see how their uses have evolved, and I see that, well, maybe, it's not so bad, maybe I'm interested in getting one for the utility, right? Because there's more stuff I can do with it than I thought. And then, of course, my kid goes over to another kid's house. He's like, why don't we have one? Right? That happens. And I think the privacy and trust issues, they're not going to go away. And I personally don't see them being sort of locked up and everyone feeling reassured about the privacy issues of voice. I think two other things are more likely to happen. One is we're going to realize we've got voice on our phones, voice in our cars, voice everywhere else anyway, and the living room is a sort of might as well. And then, as I said, there's going to be so much more value in having a voice assistant in the home that it'll start to swamp the privacy concerns that people have, as seems to have been the case in a lot of other, privacy versus utility trade-offs in the marketplace today.
I guess one last question would be, you kind of covered the generalities of voice, but are there any behaviors or things in the data that you're seeing that are specific to any of the specific voice assistants or smart speakers? Like, are folks that are using Alexa more likely to do things than folks that are using Google Assistant?
Yeah, we stayed fairly far away from that particular question, in part because, a lot of this data sits behind those folks' walled gardens, right? And so we'd love to see it. We'd love to see, know more about it, but also, they know better and they can probably figure that out. What I think one of the big questions that is out there that I'm interested in, which is related to that, is screens. We're sort of going into this other direction now where you're seeing voice assistants add screens. And I think, in terms of voice utility, the different companies have different strengths and they're going to do all different things. They're going to have different capabilities. But you're seeing across companies this addition of screens, and I'm really curious as to how that changes people's behaviors, because it seems that, just to go back to the retail example, it seems that people sort of get stuck at a certain point, for instance, about how they buy, and they're not willing to finish the purchase because they haven't seen it, right? They don't know what color the boots are. They don't know, even sometimes just seeing the price on paper, as it were, as opposed to hearing it, makes a difference as to how you process how much something costs. And so having a screen, first of all, whether people pick up screens and feel comfortable with that's going to be an interesting question. But then if they do, whether that really transforms the way that voice is used, that's something that actually we're looking to ask, in the very near future.